Hi there, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of Way To Purposeful Procurement. I'm Philip Ideson, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Fine-Tune CEO Rich Ham, and also by my partner at Art of Procurement, Kelly Barner. Rich, welcome. Kelly, welcome back to the show.
Nice to see you both, as always. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Glad to be virtually in studio.
Yes. Well, since the three of us were last together, we've had the chance to talk with both Oliver Hurrey and Brian Kyle, two leaders who really shared with us some real-world examples of what purposeful procurement is in practice. And I thought I'd kick things off here just by asking you, Rich, for some observations of those conversations that we've just had.
Well, my first observation is, frankly, I'm delighted to see examples like Ollie and Brian of people, taking their work in procurement and using whatever power comes with their stations in the working world to drive change for the better. For Brian, that means trying to find ways to optimize the American Cancer Society's ability to cure cancer and care for cancer patients and advocate for their work. And for Oliver, that means working with some of the largest companies in the world to use whatever power resides in their procurement departments to try to bend the curve of global warming via decarbonization, to try to get a handle on scope 3 emissions for the world's largest companies so that we can, start by measuring and then turn to the critically important work of improving from an emission standpoint throughout the supply chains of the world's biggest companies. This is important work. It's important work, and they are using corporate procurement to drive real change. That's procurement with purpose. Mm-hmm. And I know that not every job within procurement will ever become perhaps quite as purposeful as the work that those two gentlemen do, and the stories that they shared with us. But I also think there's tremendous potential for the entire field, everybody working in corporate procurement to become more purposeful. And so I think we're looking at some of the flaws in the system today and asking ourselves, hey, if we stripped away that flaw, or if we improved our systems of incentivization and measurement, how might the outcomes improve? I think the answer that we're going to arrive at is a lot. And it's great that we were able to take a moment to just remind the audience just how much procurement is capable of. Yeah. I loved each of those conversations. I thought they were fantastic. Now, if you don't mind, can I throw a question at you and Kelly here?
Sure.
As I reflected on those conversations, one, as I've said before, I don't come from procurement, but I've worked with multiple thousands of procurement pros over the last 25 years or so. And I know what my answer is here, but I want to ask each of you, when you see the way that these two people's views on their career are filled with such feelings of strong purpose, where they're clearly infused with an energy to tackle their work because they know the outputs make the world better. Do you think that is normal for the procurement practitioner? How rare is it? Is that something that you see a lot of, or is it something you hardly ever see, or is it more complicated than that? I'd love to hear each of your thoughts. Maybe Kelly first.
Sure. So, it's interesting when I think across the profession, do I think everybody feels that level of purpose and drive and mission? I don't, but I do think every single person in the profession has the opportunity to bring that level of joy and dedication to their work. When I think back to my days as a practitioner, so I was grocery retail, I was largely location-based services. So we've, in the series, we've talked about pest control. It was definitely uniforms. It was facilities maintenance. It was grease trap cleaning, all the glamorous stuff. But if you think about how each of those services contributes, not just to the ability of the business to be successful, to be competitive, to be profitable, if you think about how it touches each of the consumers, right? So when I think back to grocery, I'm sure everybody will relate to this. One of the most dangerous things in a grocery store, anywhere, ever, is a grape. If a grape falls out of the big display case and falls onto the floor, we all joke about banana peels, but grapes are one of the most dangerous things in supermarkets. So if either through the purchase of those structures, there's enough of a lip that I'm able to keep those grapes contained. If my floor cleaning team, if my daytime janitorial team is good at their work and stays on top of their details and meets the spec, I can keep every individual, every family that comes into that store location safe. I can get them into the store, to the grapes, out of the store and on their way. If I can do that in 100 stores, that's amazing. If I can do it in 500 stores and go an entire day with nobody getting hurt, I have, in fact, changed communities, changed family lives by simply doing my job well. I think what it comes down to is each of us remembering the real reason for why we're doing something. Okay, why am I measuring out this display case that the grapes are going to go into? Well, I have to make sure it's on budget. I have to make sure it's the right height. I have to make sure it takes up the appropriate amount of allotted space on the floor. But those safety considerations that, if we allow them to, will just become specs on a page. If we think about them in context, they are keeping people safe. They're making the stores brighter and more appealing. They're making the fruit look better, maybe influencing people's dietary choices. So I think if we look at all of the different things and services that we source for and buy and contract and manage the supplier performance of, I don't think you have to work for the American Cancer Society, right? I don't think you have to be directly combating emissions. I think as long as we remember how we connect with individuals and communities, every single person managing every single category in every company and industry has the opportunity to bring that same sort of mission into their work and have a positive impact. So do I think most people come to work with that? No, I don't. But do I think the potential for that is there? 100%. We just have to be reminded that that power is in our hands every day when we come to work, even by expecting suppliers to abide by the standards we set for them in the contract. If our suppliers live up to the excellence we expect, that entire situation changes, and I would say for the better. So we're not necessarily doing it today, but every single category of spend has the possibility to be that small and at scale at the same time.
I love that answer, Kelly.
too.
I think that when I first started thinking about this question, how far are we on the journey to purposeful procurement as a generic question? I was thinking, we're probably at the beginning. We're at the early stages. And I think we are when you put it in the context of some of the things specifically that Oliver and Brian were talking about. But then, it kind of question, at least the question of what's purpose, and purpose.
What's the definition?
Yeah,
of it?
exactly.
Yeah.
And the definition of purpose for an individual, when you think about, our hierarchy of needs, is perhaps, do I feel valued at work, or do I feel like I'm making a difference? And, I look back on my career, and I started in automotive, and I always felt a great sense of purpose when I saw the things that I was in direct materials to start with. When I saw the things that I'd been working on driving past me on the street, because you could see a direct connection with, the work that I'd done with something that is out there in the wild. And when I moved over to indirect and into services, I felt like I lost that connection a little bit. There was one example where I worked for a large pharma company, And just through being creative in terms of things we did from a procurement perspective, we were able to enable a childcare facility to be built on site of the company that I worked for. And so I felt a lot of purpose from being able to provide for that and provide this learning environment for all these kids. But, what Kelly says is there's something it's almost a mindset thing. You can look into anything that you buy and find that there's some purpose there.
Yeah.
But then you go a level above, and purpose on a procurement, kind of cross procurement level is the impact that you're having purposeful. And that's where I think we're perhaps, earlier in the journey than what us as individuals may find getting purpose from doing the act of procurement, working in procurement.
Yeah, I love both those answers. And if I could go back to Kelly's first, I would say there were a couple things Kelly said that I really found kind of remarkable or reminded me of prior discussions. Kelly, one part of your answer reminded me of something you and I talked about on the side related to the Oliver Hurrey interview from episode 3, which was where he talked about, incentives are extremely important. And of course, I would love it if procurement practitioners everywhere were incentivized to prioritize decarbonization, to prioritize various forms of impact that go beyond just cost. But he said, it's not like you have to wait for the incentives to change. You can ask permission. You can go into the C-suite or to your VP or whoever it is office and go, hey, I see an opportunity to be more purposeful here. Can I do this? Can I do this thing even if, the way we define things as of today, it might not be the optimal decision within this strict set of rules that I am to generally play by, but I'm asking for permission to push those boundaries because I see opportunities to be more purposeful. It made me think back on that and how that was kind of, I thought, a poignant thought, because of course we all recognize certain realities about human behavior, and people are going to behave selfishly ultimately. And so, that's all true. And so fixing the incentives is really important, but it's possible even working within flawed systems to try to become more purposeful. So that was great. The other thing that I thought, well, actually one thing I thought while you were speaking was I wanted to turn into my best Homer Simpson voice and say, grease trap cleaning. But that's just the way my brain works.
Grapes?
Grapes. By the way, perhaps also a choking hazard for 2-year-old toddlers walking around the store. You got to be careful
Absolutely.
letting kids get their hands on grapes. Those grapes are horrifying.
Especially
the more you think about
gross
them.
floor
Really,
grapes. Yeah.
just truly horrifying. I thank you for bringing our attention to how
But it's not a silly thing.
No, absolutely not. It's very real.
That we can't find joy in our work.
Yes.
If you find joy in what you're doing, it could be everything from wiping counter surfaces to measuring or figuring out the thickness of the plastic bag, right, that people are going to put their food in to leave the store. If you can find joy, I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, right? He would tour a factory, fascinating stuff. If you can bring that level of curiosity and that level of joy, it doesn't matter if you're buying grape containers or stainless steel or designing parts for inside of cars, Phil, or setting up daycare centers. If you bring joy and curiosity, it does not matter what your job is, you have the ability to change the world. There is no doubt in my mind.
Totally. And yet I think we all agree, because we believe in the potential power of corporate procurement as a field, that wherever we are today, whatever the current level of purposeful procurement is, we believe that there is tremendous upside, that the gap between what is and what could be is massive. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think there's two things at play. I think one is it's important that we should all feel empowered that we have the ability to make our work as purposeful as possible on an individual level. But really what we're trying to explore is at this corporate level, how do we scale that? Because that's all well and good kind of within an individual and an individual being empowered to find purpose in their work. But how do we scale what we do, so that at an organizational level, we're being more purposeful, being more impactful, being, I don't want to say more respected, but more, the value that we create is more identified and acknowledged, because I think that's one of our deep psychological flaws in procurement that I certainly grew up with, was this idea that, well, nobody values what you do, and so it's us versus them. And that takes away from the feeling of feeling like you got purpose, because you feel like you're always in a battle to prove yourself.
Yeah, you just used the word respect, and it reminded me, I was recently downloading with one of the people who've been helping with this project behind the scenes, Dan Kreitz from my team, and he noted how both Oliver Hurrey and Brian Kyle had used the word trust quite a bit in their discussions, and it was really around their views on what procurement needed in order to become as purposeful as possible. They needed trust within the organization. I thought that was a really interesting concept, and I think I do believe. I'll just go ahead and put my opinion out there. I think the incentive structure flaws that we're exploring in this project serve as a barrier to optimal trust.
Yep.
And I think the fix could unleash the potential to gain that trust and make huge advancements in the direction of purposeful procurement. You're nodding your head, Phil.
Yeah, because I think that we've talked about the battles of the validity of cost savings, back a couple of episodes ago, and so a lot of trust is lost there in terms of what we say we are doing versus what the numbers may suggest that we're doing. By not having that trust with the organization, it's hard for us to go and say we're going to bring more value in these other ways, in ways that are harder for you to measure, because they may look and say, well, the thing that we can measure, we don't necessarily trust what you're telling us. So how can we trust the things that you tell us that are going to be harder to measure, that you're going to do those and that you're really going to be impactful or not? Yeah. And when you look at a CFO or a CEO that's making an investment decision in where they're going to put their money internally, then there's probably other areas of the organization where they may have more trust that what's been said that is going to be delivered will be delivered. And that's not because we're not delivering it. It's just because the ways that we report the value that we bring are still somewhat flawed.
Yeah, totally agree. Kelly, did you have any insights, or did you want to share anything on that topic? I don't want to move on until we hear from you.
No, absolutely. And it's funny. I go back to one word that Phil said earlier, which was scale, right? Because I'm not going to jump us ahead. I know we're going sort of to some of the history around this, but if you think about how most procurement teams started, right? It was pretty safe. You pick a safe category. We always fall back on the classic example of office supplies. You revolutionize the way office supplies are sourced, purchased, contracted for, all of that. And everybody goes, this is amazing. We need more of it everywhere really fast. And in the drive to reach that scale, you, of course, have to systematize and standardize. And I think in doing that, we end up unintentionally beating a lot of the opportunity out of the system on our way to the race to put everything through the same process. And so I think some of this is actually a reward for our own initial success, right? That we were so effective right out of the gate with some pilot category of spend. What we have to do is find that way to balance out. Yes, we need to be at scale. We need to have standardization, and there needs to be a system. But there also has to be that flexibility, that space to remember why you're doing something. I think that's the piece that hopefully will come up in future conversations, because I do think that's part of that problem that has to be solved.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thanks for that, Kelly. I think I want to help us kind of draw this episode to a conclusion in the next handful of minutes here by looking ahead a little bit at our next guest that's going to be joining us for episode 6. And in doing that, I'll pose the question: how did we get here? Why are the rules that govern procurement departments and that influence the behavior of people within procurement departments what they are today? And Phil, I know you're excited to talk to Rob Hills in our next episode. Rob's a retired Deloitte partner who ran supply chain at Deloitte and is one of the more influential and experienced professionals in his field in the United States over the last 3 decades at least. And I'm really eager to hear from him. He was at the epicenter of some interesting times on the evolution to where we are today. But you too, Phil, have been in positions where you have, I think it's fair to say, based on some stories you've told me, witnessed some previous attempts to kind of tackle some of the flaws we're talking about today. Yeah, maybe share a little bit with the audience before we wrap up and look ahead at episode 6.
Yeah, and it's funny, I want to go back further than that and say that part of the reason that I'm here doing what I do at Art of Procurement is because I also did some of the things earlier in my career that we talked about, the flaws, the dysfunctions, things that I wasn't proud of that I did, but I was in a system which suggested that was the only thing that you did, and that was the operating model and operating procedure.
We really should have shared some of those stories with the audience back in episode 2. I have to chastise you for not opening up and bearing your soul a little more with our audience. That would have been great.
I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Very good, very good.
There's things that the environment that I was in supported actions that I thought were unethical, and so those are some of the things that drove me on the journey that I went on out of that to look at, is there better ways to do procurement? Is there better ways to build relationships with suppliers that are based on trust, that are based on the collaboration, some of the things we've just been talking about, and not this environment where it's just a zero-sum game, where there's no trust, where everyone thinks that somebody else is trying to get one up over them. And that's the environment that I was in, where it basically anything goes, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, and I use air quotes, that you win.
Yeah.
That a negotiation was a winner or a loser.
That you declare victory.
Yes.
You might not have even won. Did you declare victory?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, that's driven me a lot to where we are today. And yes, through the course of my career, I've looked at ways and being involved in ways of trying to overcome some of the flaws, but the challenge is it's not easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here 20, 25 years later, still talking about it, still trying to figure out what the solution was. I moved from the practitioner side to the consulting side, a few years ago, and I was in an organization where we had, we were measured on savings as a consultancy firm and driving savings for our clients. I had very, aggressive metrics from a savings perspective. But, what we were really big on is the savings had to be validated. So you had to go at invoice line level to say, yes, those savings, at least in the way that it was billed back to the company and invoiced back to the company, existed. And we could only get credit for savings that were invoiced. So that would, you could no longer just assume that, well, I'm going to take a savings methodology that suggests I'm going to buy X of this, Y of this, and Z of something else, and just average it all out and claim my savings. That way it would be, what did you actually buy?
It had to be real.
It had to be real, and it had to be...
What a novel concept.
Yeah, and had to be validated as being real. The problem was, and you didn't know what your savings were until that year afterwards, because you'd validated what your savings were. There were two difficulties with that. One was the amount of resource required to validate the savings. And two, we found our clients didn't really care. That
because of their own incentive plans.
Probably.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the CFO may care, depending on who we'd sold the deal to, but the procurement folks didn't necessarily. It was more, a nuisance or noise to them. And because we had so much resources, teams and teams of people who were doing this, like filtering and sorting through all these invoices, just, figured that it's probably not even worth offering this as an option anymore. And so we no longer did.
I'm not surprised to hear you say that, Phil. I want to throw it to Kelly, and then I'm going to make a couple of predictions, though, based on all that. But I wonder, Kelly, if you had any reactions to what Phil just shared.
Well, I'm mostly surprised that Phil was doing things that maybe he wasn't proud of in the past. I don't think we need maybe a full Art of Procurement Phil on the therapist couch offering up some of these confessions.
That can be the Halloween episode.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. No, but the reality is, we're offering benefit of the doubt here, but anyone is going to respond to the incentives and circumstances of the system they're dropped into. And so I think if we're giving people anything, it's permission to look. It's like, that was the past. We're looking at now. We're going to chart a new future. The reality is we all assume that these metrics and incentives have been set up to deliberately drive us in a certain direction, and you respond to that. So I think it's the difference between working without thinking about it inside of a system and deliberately choosing, oh, I'm going to defraud, I'm going to misreport, right? We're certainly not suggesting any of that. But no, absolutely. I think if even in cases where we think we did absolutely the right thing for everybody, if we looked at them either from a different perspective or as part of a larger system, I'm sure there was downside in there for somebody. So even in cases where we didn't respond to a perverse incentive and sort of do the wrong thing or hold money back, there was still downside somewhere. So it's always worth looking at all of these things from the biggest picture perspective.
Yeah, well said. So two thoughts that I have, and I called them predictions earlier, but the truth is they're just kind of opinions that I suspect will have various guests in the coming episodes confirm. I think that will happen. We'll see if it actually does. But one, Phil, why would you ever validate any initiative? It's because, and we've talked about this before, we all understand that there does exist some gap between what gets negotiated and what happens, what gets executed in the real world. I know this part. I believe that I can say that I know just because of what we do at Fine Tune. But having witnessed indirect services supplier tactics over the last 20 years or so, I am quite confident that the negotiation execution gap has done nothing but grow over the last 15 years. I believe beyond a doubt that a contract in 2025, I think I just jumped us ahead something like, 20,000 years. In 2025 is less determinative of actual spend, than a contract was in, say, 2007. And we can get into the reasons for that, but it's a combination of loss of departmental bandwidth. It's influenced certainly by the incentive plans not requiring validation. It's part and parcel a product of supplier industry consolidation and an emboldened universe of suppliers, coming up with more buttons to push and levers to pull to grab margin after deals get signed. It's a complicated mix of these things, but I've seen it happen. The negotiation execution gap is probably at an all-time high now. In other words, the problem's bigger if you want to earn trust, right? The likelihood that your efforts are real, or let's even flip it on its head. The likelihood that your efforts are getting rapidly eroded after the work is done, i.e. a contract is signed, is very high. It's higher than it's ever been. So the problem's bigger. I'll also say, however, because I want to pick up on what you were saying about the validation work is hard. Yes, but I think technology and even now AI have made it more doable than ever.
Yep.
And so we've got this combination of a problem that is more worth solving than it was 15 years ago and a solution that's actually more attainable than ever before. In other words, I think our project is timely. I think this discussion is timely, and I'm really excited for this next handful of episodes because I think we're going to hear some interesting insights along these threads that we're pursuing right now.